I never thought I'd be the kind of person to break into someone's house. But then again, I never thought my wife would disappear without a trace, leaving behind nothing but questions and a stranger living in our home who insisted he'd been there all along. It started 3 months ago, on a Tuesday that began like any other. I kissed Sarah goodbye as she left for her morning jog, the same route she'd taken every day for the past 5 years through Millbrook Park. She wore her lucky blue running shoes and had her hair pulled back in that messy bun I'd grown to love. I was grading papers when she left senior essays about The Great Gatsby that were about as inspiring as watching paint dry. She never came back. The police were sympathetic, but ultimately useless. Adults have the right to disappear. Detective Morrison told me, her voice carrying that practiced indifference that comes from delivering bad news too many times. No signs of foul play, no financial irregularities, no indication of domestic trouble. Sometimes people just leave. But I knew Sarah. She wouldn't leave. Not without her grandmother's ring, not without her collection of vintage postcards, and certainly not without telling me. We'd been married for 8 years, together for 12. You don't just wake up one morning and abandon that kind of history. The first strange thing happened a week after she vanished. I was sitting in our kitchen, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours earlier, when someone knocked on the door. I opened it to find a man in his 40s, with kind eyes and a confused expression. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said, "but I think there's been some kind of mistake. This is my house." I stared at him. "Excuse me?" "This house." He gestured past me into the foyer. "I've lived here for 3 years. I was out of town visiting my sister, and when I came back, all my stuff is gone and, well, your stuff is here instead." My blood ran cold. "What's your name?" "David Chen. Look, I have the deed right here." He pulled out a folded document. "And here's my driver's license. Same address." I looked at the papers. They were legitimate, or at least, they looked legitimate. The address was correct, 1247 Maple Street. But this was my house. I'd lived here with Sarah since we got married. We'd painted these walls together, installed that crooked shelf in the hallway, argued about whether to keep the ugly bathroom tiles from the previous owner. "I think you're confused," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Something about David Chen seemed familiar, like I'd seen him before but couldn't place where. "Maybe we should call the police," he suggested gently. "Get this sorted out." I agreed, mainly because I was too stunned to do anything else. 2 officers arrived 20 minutes later, not Detective Morrison, thankfully, but 2 younger cops who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. They examined both our identification, asked us to describe the house, and grew increasingly uncomfortable as we both provided accurate details about the interior layout. "Look," Officer Martinez said finally, "this is really more of a civil matter. You guys need to contact your insurance companies, maybe get lawyers involved. We can't really." "Wait," I interrupted, pulling out my phone. "I have pictures. From when we moved in, from our anniversary last year." I scrolled through my photo gallery, looking for any image that would prove this was my home. There were none. Every photo I'd taken inside the house was gone. Pictures of Sarah cooking in our kitchen, of Christmas morning by our tree, of the birthday party we'd thrown for her sister all vanished from my phone as if they'd never existed. The photos on my computer showed the same thing, images of Sarah and me, but always somewhere else. Restaurants, parks, her parents' house, but never here. "That's impossible," I whispered, staring at the screen. David Chen looked genuinely sympathetic. "I'm sorry, man. I really am. But this is my house. Maybe you're thinking of a different address?" "Sometimes when you're stressed." I left. I didn't know what else to do. I drove to a motel on the other side of town and paid for a room with cash, my hands shaking as I signed the register. That night, I lay awake staring at the water-stained ceiling, trying to make sense of what had happened. The rational explanation was that I was having some kind of breakdown. Sarah's disappearance had pushed me over the edge, and now I was manufacturing false memories, confusing houses, losing my grip on reality. It wouldn't be the first time a spouse had cracked under the pressure of a missing person case. But I knew our house. I knew the creak in the third stair, the way the bathroom door stuck when it rained, the exact shade of yellow we'd painted the bedroom after Sarah decided she hated the original beige. You don't imagine details like that. I started investigating. Over the next few weeks, I became a detective in my own life, trying to piece together evidence of my existence at 1247 Maple Street. I visited the post office, the utility companies, even our neighbors. The results were always the same. According to every official record, David Chen had lived at that address for 3 years. Before that, the house had belonged to an elderly woman named Margaret Phillips who died in 2019. There was no trace of Sarah and me ever living there. "You're mistaken," said Mrs. Henderson from next door, the same woman who used to complain about Sarah's wind chimes being too loud. "David's a lovely young man. Keeps his yard so nice. I've never seen you before in my life." I showed her pictures of Sarah, but she just shook her head with the polite confusion of someone humoring a stranger. The mailman, the guy who delivered groceries, the teenager who used to mow our lawn, none of them remembered us. It was like we'd been erased. I started following David Chen. I know how that sounds, but I had to understand what was happening. Every morning, he left the house at 8:30 and drove to a small accounting firm downtown. He ate lunch at the same deli where Sarah and I used to go, ordered the same turkey sandwich I always got. In the evenings, he'd return home and tend to the garden that Sarah had planted, watering the roses she'd chosen, trimming the hedges we'd argued about keeping. He lived our life, but better, cleaner, more organized. The version of our life that existed in the gap between intention and reality. I tried to break into the house twice. The first time, I lost my nerve when David came home early. The second time, a neighbor spotted me and called the police. Officer Martinez recognized me from before and suggested, not unkindly, that I might want to talk to someone about processing my grief. But I wasn't grieving. I was remembering. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, my mother. I'd been avoiding her calls because I didn't know how to explain what was happening, but she finally cornered me by showing up at the school where I taught. "Thomas, you look terrible," she said, which was probably true. I'd been living on vending machine food and sleeping in my car more often than not. "What's going on? Sarah's mother is worried sick. No one's heard from either of you in weeks." That stopped me cold. "What do you mean, Sarah's mother?" "Linda called me yesterday. She's been trying to reach Sarah about Thanksgiving plans, but your phone goes straight to voicemail, and no one answers at the house." I stared at my mother. According to everyone I'd talked to, there was no record of Sarah ever existing. The police had found no trace of her, no missing person report, nothing. But Linda, Sarah's mother, was still expecting her for Thanksgiving. "Mom," I said carefully, "what's Sarah's mother's full name?" "Linda Kovach, of course." "Thomas, are you feeling all right? You're scaring me." I drove to Linda's house that same afternoon. She lived 2 hours away in a small town I'd visited dozens of times, but as I pulled into her driveway, I felt a familiar uncertainty creeping in. What if she didn't remember Sarah either? What if this was just another dead end? Linda answered the door before I could knock, her face lighting up with the kind of joy reserved for favorite sons-in-law. "Thomas, what a wonderful surprise. Come in, come in. Where's Sarah? Is she parking the car?" I almost cried with relief. Here, finally, was someone who remembered. "Linda, I need to ask you something, and it's going to sound crazy." She led me to her kitchen and put on a pot of coffee, the same ritual she'd performed every time we visited. "Of course, dear. What's wrong? You look exhausted." "Sarah's missing. She disappeared 3 weeks ago." Linda's hand froze halfway to the coffee pot. "Missing? What do you mean missing?" I told her everything. The morning jog, the police investigation, David Chen, the house that apparently wasn't ours anymore. Linda listened without interrupting, her face growing paler with each detail. "That's impossible," she said when I finished. "I have pictures of you two in that house. I have your wedding album. Sarah called me just last month from your kitchen phone. Can you show me, please?" Linda disappeared into her den and returned with a photo album I recognized. Sarah had put it together for her mother's birthday 2 years ago. But when Linda opened it, my stomach dropped. Half the pictures were gone. Not removed, gone, as if they'd never been taken. Photos of Sarah alone remained, but every image that had shown both of us, or just me, or anything in our house, had simply disappeared. The album pages had empty spaces, but no indication that photos had ever been there. "I don't understand," Linda whispered, flipping through page after page of gaps. "These pictures, I know there were more pictures. You remember me, though. You remember Sarah and me together." "Of course I do. You've been married for 8 years. You teach high school English. You have that terrible habit of leaving coffee cups all over the house." She paused, frowning. "But I can't. I can't remember your wedding. I know it happened. I know I was there. But when I try to picture it..." I watched her face as she struggled with the contradiction. She knew we were married, but couldn't remember the wedding. She knew I existed, but couldn't prove it. The certainty in her eyes slowly gave way to the same confused doubt I'd been living with for weeks. "Someone is taking our memories," I said. "Someone is erasing us, piece by piece." That night, I stayed in Linda's guest room, the same room Sarah and I had shared during visits. I lay awake thinking about David Chen, about the way he'd looked at me with such genuine confusion and sympathy. He wasn't malicious. He truly believed the house was his, just like Mrs. Henderson truly believed she'd never seen me before. But someone was orchestrating this. Someone was rewriting reality, removing traces of our existence, while leaving just enough behind to drive me insane. The question was why. I thought about the photos on my phone, how they'd vanished while I was looking at them. I thought about the empty spaces in Linda's album, and the way people's memories seemed to shift when I pushed too hard for details. Whatever was happening, it was ongoing, active, which meant it could be stopped. The next morning, I told Linda I was going to find Sarah. "How?" she asked. "If what you're saying is true, if someone really is erasing you, how do you fight something like that?" "I don't know, but I know where to start." I drove back to town and parked across the street from 1247 Maple Street. David Chen's car wasn't in the driveway. It was Tuesday, so he'd be at work until 5. I'd spent enough time watching to know his schedule. This time, I didn't try to break in. Instead, I walked up to the front door and rang the bell. When no one answered, I used the spare key I knew would be hidden under the fake rock by the porch steps. The same rock Sarah had bought because she was always forgetting her keys. The house was exactly as I remembered, but different, cleaner, as I'd noticed before, more organized. David's possessions had replaced ours, but they occupied the same spaces. His diplomas where our wedding photo had hung, his books on the shelves where Sarah's novels had been, his coffee mug in the cabinet where mine used to sit. It was like looking at a more perfect version of our life. I searched systematically, starting with the basement. David had converted what used to be Sarah's craft room into a home office. His computer was password protected, but his filing cabinet wasn't. Inside, I found tax returns, utility bills, insurance policies, all the mundane documentation of a life at this address. But tucked behind his birth certificate was something that made my blood freeze, a real estate listing for 1247 Maple Street, dated 3 months ago. The same week Sarah disappeared. According to the listing, the house had been sold by Margaret Phillips's estate to David Chen for $287,000. But Margaret Phillips had died in 2019, and I knew for a fact that Sarah and I had bought the house from her nephew in 2015. The dates didn't match. I kept searching and found more inconsistencies. David's driver's license showed the Maple Street address, but it had been issued only 6 months ago. His credit report showed a short history no more than 2 years. His bank statements began in January of this year. David Chen had a paper trail, but it was thin, recent, like someone had built him a life from scratch. I was photographing the documents with my phone when I heard a car in the driveway. My heart hammered as I quickly replaced everything and crept to the front window. David was home early, talking on his phone as he walked toward the house. I had maybe 30 seconds before he came inside. I looked around frantically for somewhere to hide, then remembered the crawl space behind the basement stairs. Sarah had discovered it when we were looking for the source of a weird smell that turned out to be a dead raccoon. I squeezed into the narrow space just as I heard David's key in the front door. Through the thin basement ceiling, I could hear his footsteps as he moved around the house. Normal sounds: dropping his keys, opening the refrigerator, turning on the television. I waited an hour before creeping out. David was upstairs. I could hear water running in the bathroom. I made it to the back door without incident and slipped out into the yard. But as I reached the fence, I heard something that stopped me cold. Sarah's voice. It was coming from upstairs, muffled but unmistakable. She was talking to David, her tone casual and affectionate. The same voice that had wished me good morning 3 months ago, the last words I'd heard her speak. I stood frozen in the backyard, listening to my wife have a conversation with a stranger in what used to be our bedroom. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew her laugh, the rhythm of her speech, the way she always got animated when telling a story. Sarah was alive. She was here, in our house, with David Chen. And she didn't remember me. I climbed the old oak tree in the backyard, the same tree I'd helped Sarah hang a swing from last spring. From the upper branches, I could see into our bedroom window. The curtains were partially drawn, but I caught glimpses of 2 figures moving around the room. David was there, and so was a woman with Sarah's build and Sarah's hair. But something was wrong with the scene. Their movements were too coordinated, too smooth. They moved around each other like dancers who'd rehearsed the same routine 1,000 times. As I watched, the woman turned toward the window. It was Sarah's face, but blank, empty, like looking at a photograph of someone rather than the person themselves. I nearly fell out of the tree. That wasn't my wife. It looked like Sarah, sounded like Sarah, but it was something else wearing her face. And David. David moved with the same eerie precision, mechanical. Artificial. I climbed down as quietly as I could and ran to my car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely start the engine. Whatever was in that house, it wasn't human. And if they were impersonating Sarah and David Chen, what had happened to the real people? I drove to Linda's house without stopping. She took one look at my face and poured me a double whiskey before I could say a word. I found her, I said. I found Sarah. Where? Is she hurt? Should we call the police? She's in our house, with David Chen. But Linda, it's not really her. I told her what I'd seen, trying to make sense of it myself as I spoke. The perfect coordination, the blank expression, the way they'd moved like puppets being operated by the same hand. That's impossible, Linda said, but she didn't sound convinced. People don't just replace other people. Don't they? Think about it. David Chen appears with a complete paper trail, but no real history. Sarah disappears without a trace. Everyone's memories start changing. And now there's something in our house that looks like Sarah, but isn't her. Linda sat quietly for a long time, staring into her whiskey glass. What are you going to do? I'm going back. Tonight. I need to know what happened to the real Sarah. Thomas, if these things aren't human, if they're dangerous, then I need to know that too. I waited until after midnight before returning to Maple Street. The house was dark, except for a dim light in the basement, the same light I used to leave on when I worked late grading papers. Everything about the scene was perfectly normal, which somehow made it more terrifying. I let myself in through the back door and moved through the kitchen as quietly as possible. The house felt different at night, heavier, like the air itself was holding its breath. The basement light was coming from David's office. I crept down the stairs, testing each step before putting my full weight on it. The third stair from the top still creaked, just like it always had. The office door was partially open, and I could see David sitting at his desk, perfectly still. Too still. I watched for 2 full minutes without seeing him move or breathe. He was staring at a computer screen that displayed nothing but a blue background. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. David turned toward me with the smooth, mechanical precision I'd observed earlier. His face was blank, expressionless. When he spoke, his voice carried no emotion at all. Hello, Thomas. You know who I am. Of course, you're Sarah's husband. You live at 1247 Maple Street. You teach English at Roosevelt High School. You have a scar on your left hand from when you tried to fix the garbage disposal. Every detail was correct, but the way he recited them felt wrong, like he was reading from a script. Where is she? Where's the real Sarah? David tilted his head slightly. I am real. Sarah is real. This is real. No, you're not. I don't know what you are, but you're not David Chen, and that thing upstairs isn't my wife. Memory is unreliable. David said. People remember what they want to remember, forget what causes them pain. Sometimes it's kinder to help them forget. Help them forget what? David stood up from his chair with that same unnatural smoothness. Sarah was unhappy, Thomas. More unhappy than you knew. The morning she disappeared, she wasn't going for a jog. She was leaving you. The words hit me like a physical blow. That's not true. She had been planning it for months. She'd found an apartment across town, had been moving her belongings out little by little. The morning you last saw her, she was taking the final box to her car. Number. But even as I said it, doubt crept in. Sarah had been distant lately, working late more often, spending more time on her phone. I'd attributed it to stress at her job, but she was going to leave a note, David continued. But she couldn't bring herself to hurt you that way, so she asked us to help. Who is us? We are the memory keepers. We tend to the places where the past becomes too heavy to bear. We preserve what should be remembered and edit what should be forgotten. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. You're saying Sarah hired you to, what, erase our marriage? To give you both a chance at happiness. Sarah wanted a clean break, and you would have been destroyed by her leaving. This way, you remember the good times but not the pain of abandonment. This way, everyone gets the life they deserve. By replacing her with a fake, by creating a version of events where she never had to hurt you. The Sarah upstairs is real, Thomas. She has all of Sarah's memories, her personality, her mannerisms. She loves David the way your Sarah loved you, before things went wrong. My legs felt weak. I sank into a chair, struggling to breathe. And the real Sarah is living her new life, happy, free, with no memory of the pain she was carrying. I want to see her. That wouldn't be wise. You're not part of her story anymore. Rage bubbled up inside me. I don't care if it's wise. I want to see my wife. David regarded me with those empty eyes. That's not possible, but I can offer you something else. What? The same gift we gave her. We can edit your memories, remove the pain of loss, integrate you into a new narrative where you were never married. You could be happy, Thomas. Free from the weight of a relationship that was already over. I thought about the past 3 months, the confusion, the isolation, the slow erosion of everything I thought I knew about my life, the constant questioning of my own sanity. And if I refuse? Then you continue as you have been, knowing the truth but unable to prove it, watching the world forget you piece by piece. Eventually, even Linda will stop remembering. Eventually, you'll be completely alone. The basement fell silent except for the hum of the furnace. I stared at David, this thing that looked like a man but spoke about editing reality like it was nothing more than a word processing document. There's a third option, I said finally. Which is, I stop you. David smiled for the first time since I'd entered the room. It was Sarah's smile, warm and genuine, but on his face, it looked like a mask. You can't stop us, Thomas. We are the custodians of memory itself. We exist in the spaces between what was and what is remembered. You're just one man trying to fight the fundamental nature of human consciousness. Maybe, but I'm going to try. I stood up and walked toward the stairs. David made no move to stop me. The Sarah upstairs won't remember you, he called after me. If you try to talk to her, you'll only cause confusion and pain. I climbed the stairs without responding. Each step felt like walking through water, reality growing thicker around me. By the time I reached the kitchen, I could barely think straight. Some force was pressing against my mind, trying to convince me that I was confused, that I should go home and forget any of this had happened. But I didn't have a home to go to anymore. I made it to the bedroom door before the mental pressure became too intense. I could hear Sarah breathing on the other side, the familiar rhythm of her sleep. For a moment, I almost opened the door. Almost convinced myself that if I could just see her, talk to her, everything would go back to normal. Instead, I turned around and walked back downstairs. David was waiting in the kitchen. Wise choice, he said. This isn't over. Yes, it is. I felt the mental pressure intensify, trying to push me toward the door, toward forgetting, but I fought it, clinging to my anger like an anchor. They had stolen my wife, my home, my entire life. I wouldn't let them steal my memories too. I made it to my car and drove away, my vision blurring as competing realities warred in my head. Part of me wanted to believe David's story, that Sarah had been unhappy and this was all for the best. It would be easier than fighting. But I remembered her smile that last morning. Real joy, not the artificial expression I'd seen on the thing upstairs. Sarah had been happy with me. Maybe not perfectly happy, but happy enough to kiss me goodbye and promise to pick up groceries on her way home from jogging. Someone had taken that away from us, and I was going to get it back. I spent the next week preparing. I researched everything I could find about memory manipulation, false memories, collective amnesia. Most of it was theoretical, but I found enough scientific literature to confirm that memory was more fragile than people like to believe. Under the right conditions, with the right techniques, it was possible to make people remember things that had never happened, or forget things that had. The memory keepers, whatever they were, had weaponized this knowledge. They could edit individual memories or rewrite entire histories, but they weren't gods. They had limitations, or they wouldn't have needed to create the illusion of David Chen. They wouldn't have left traces like Linda's partial memories or my own intact recollections. There were cracks in their system, and cracks could be exploited. I started with the real estate listing I'd found in David's office. The sale of 1,247 Maple Street to David Chen was recorded in the county database, but when I dug deeper, I found inconsistencies. The previous sale from Margaret Phillips to Sarah and me in 2015 was also recorded, creating a legal paradox. The same property couldn't have been sold by the same person to two different buyers. I brought this to a lawyer named Jennifer Walsh, who specialized in real estate fraud. She was skeptical at first, but when I showed her the documentation, her expression grew troubled. "This is very strange," she admitted. "According to these records, the house has been sold twice by the same estate. That's not possible unless there was fraud involved. What would you need to investigate?" "I'd need to examine the original sale documents, interview the estate executor, maybe bring in a forensic accountant. But Mr. Hartley, this kind of investigation could take months and cost thousands of dollars. Are you sure you want to pursue this?" I gave her a retainer check for $5,000 money I'd borrowed against my teacher's pension. "I'm sure." While Jennifer worked on the legal angle, I focused on Linda. Her memories were the strongest evidence I had that the memory keeper's work wasn't perfect. If I could help her remember more details, maybe I could find other people who retained fragments of the truth. I visited her every few days, always bringing photo albums, souvenirs, anything that might trigger clearer recollections. Slowly, painfully, she began to remember more. The wedding came back first, bits and pieces of the ceremony, then the reception, then the planning process. "We argued about the flowers," she said one afternoon, tears streaming down her face. "Sarah wanted white roses, but you said they were too expensive, so we got pink ones instead." She was so upset, but later she said they were prettier anyway. "Do you remember anything else? About our house? About our life together?" The housewarming party. Sarah was so excited to show off the kitchen. She made that terrible lasagna with too much oregano. Linda laughed through her tears. "You ate 3 helpings and pretended it was delicious." Each recovered memory felt like a small victory, but also like pulling splinters from a wound. Linda was in pain, caught between 2 versions of reality. Sometimes she'd forget our conversations entirely and greet me as a stranger. Other times, she'd call in the middle of the night, panicked and confused, asking why she couldn't remember her daughter's husband. After 2 weeks, Jennifer called with news about the real estate investigation. "I found something interesting," she said. "The estate executor for Margaret Phillips is a man named Robert Kellner. He's been handling unusual property transactions for the past 10 years, always cases where the legal ownership was somehow disputed or unclear." "What kind of disputes?" "Missing heirs, forged documents, properties that seem to exist in 2 places at once. The kind of cases that should be impossible but somehow keep happening. I think Mr. Kellner might be able to answer some of your questions." Robert Kellner's office was in a rundown strip mall on the outskirts of town. The waiting room smelled like stale coffee and old carpet, with magazines from 2018 scattered on a plastic table. Kellner himself was a thin man in his 60s with tired eyes and the demeanor of someone who'd seen too much. "Mr. Hartley," he said, shaking my hand with a grip that felt oddly cold. "I understand you have questions about the Phillips estate. I want to know how you sold the same house to two different people." Kellner gestured for me to sit in a worn leather chair across from his desk. "That's a complicated question. Property law can be fluid in certain circumstances." "Fluid how?" "Tell me, Mr. Hartley, do you believe in the supernatural?" The question caught me off guard. "I believe in what I can prove." "And what if the proof keeps changing? What if the very nature of reality is more malleable than we'd like to admit?" Kellner opened a filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. "I've been handling cases like yours for a very long time. Properties that exist in multiple states simultaneously. Ownership that shifts depending on who's asking. Families that remember different versions of the same events. You're talking about the memory keepers." Kellner's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. "I'm talking about the necessity of managing transitions. When reality becomes untenable, when people are trapped by circumstances they can't escape, sometimes intervention is required." "Whose intervention?" "There are entities that exist in the spaces between memory and forgetting. They serve a function, Mr. Hartley. They prevent psychological breaks, ease suffering, maintain stability. The work they do is often thankless, but always necessary." I leaned forward in my chair. "They stole my wife. They saved her from a situation that was causing her immense pain, and they offered to save you as well. I don't want to be saved. I want Sarah back." Kellner closed the folder and returned it to the filing cabinet. "That's not possible. The transition is complete. Sarah belongs to a different narrative now." "Where is she?" "I can't tell you that. Won't or can't. Does it matter?" I stood up, frustration boiling over. "It matters to me. It matters to Linda. It matters to everyone whose memories you've stolen." "Memories aren't stolen, Mr. Hartley. They're edited, curated. We preserve what serves the greater good and remove what causes unnecessary suffering." "Who gave you the right to decide what people should remember?" For the first time, Kellner smiled. It was the same empty expression I'd seen on David Chen's face. "We gave ourselves that right, and we've been exercising it for longer than you can imagine." I left his office with more questions than answers, but also with a clearer understanding of what I was fighting. The memory keepers weren't just editing individual memories, they were reshaping reality itself, one transaction at a time. Robert Kellner was part of their network, facilitating the legal framework that made their interventions possible. But if they needed legal paperwork, that meant they still had to operate within certain rules, and rules could be broken. That night, I broke into Kellner's office. The security system was older than my car and about as effective. I was inside within 10 minutes, using skills I'd learned from a student who'd been caught breaking into the school multiple times. The filing cabinets were locked, but the keys were hanging on a hook behind Kellner's desk. I found my file quickly, a thick folder labeled Hartley, Chen Transition. Inside were documents I'd never seen before, psychological evaluations of Sarah, surveillance reports on our marriage, detailed plans for what they called narrative reconstruction. According to the reports, Sarah had been contacted by the memory keepers 3 months before her disappearance. She'd been struggling with what the files described as chronic relationship dissatisfaction and unresolved compatibility issues. The memory keepers had offered her a solution. They would extract her from the relationship and create an alternative history where the marriage had never happened. But the process was more complex than I'd imagined. They hadn't just erased Sarah and me from each other's lives, they'd created entirely new timelines. In Sarah's new reality, she'd never met me. She'd dated different people, made different choices, lived a different life that led her to David Chen. The David Chen in our house wasn't a replacement, was Sarah's husband in the alternative timeline the memory keepers had created for her. I found Sarah's new address in the file, 1247 Maple Street, Millbrook, the same address as our old house, but in a different Millbrook, in a different version of reality. She was living our life, but with David instead of me. The file also contained something else, the location of what they called the transition center, where the memory keepers performed their reality editing. It was an address I recognized, the old Millbrook mental health facility that had been closed for renovations 5 years ago. I'd driven past it hundreds of times without giving it a second thought. I copied everything I could and left the office the same way I'd entered. By morning, I had a plan. The Millbrook Mental Health Facility sat on 50 acres of wooded land outside town. The main building was a Gothic revival structure from the 1920s, all pointed arches and imposing stonework. It had been abandoned since 2018, when the county moved mental health services to a newer facility downtown. Or at least, that's what everyone believed. I parked a quarter-mile away and approached on foot, using the tree line for cover. The building looked deserted from the outside, broken windows, overgrown landscaping, chain-link fences with no trespassing signs. But as I got closer, I noticed details that didn't fit the abandoned narrative. The parking lot, while empty, was recently paved. The windows, while broken, had been broken deliberately. The glass was too evenly distributed, too clean. And despite the no trespassing signs, there was no graffiti, no evidence of vandalism. Someone was maintaining this place while making it look abandoned. I found a service entrance on the north side of the building. The door was locked, but the frame was old wood that gave way after a few good kicks. I slipped inside and found myself in a service corridor that ran the length of the building. The interior told a different story than the exterior. The floors were clean, the walls recently painted. Emergency lighting cast everything in a dim red glow, but I could see that the facility was very much in use. Doors lined both sides of the corridor, each marked with a number and what looked like patient codes. I tried the first door. It was unlocked and opened into a small room with white walls and a single chair facing a large mirror. The setup reminded me of an interrogation room, but cleaner, more clinical. A small placard next to the chair read, "Memory Recovery Station 1." The second room was identical, as was the third. I counted 24 rooms total, all with the same stark setup, but it was the room at the end of the corridor that made my blood run cold. Through a reinforced window, I could see a larger space filled with what looked like medical equipment, IV stands, monitoring devices, and a dozen beds arranged in 2 neat rows. Half the beds were occupied. I recognized the third bed from the left immediately. Sarah lay there, perfectly still, her eyes closed. Wires ran from electrodes on her temples to a machine that displayed what looked like brain activity patterns. She appeared to be sleeping, but there was something wrong with the rhythm of her breathing. Too slow, too regular. The other patients, if that's what they were, showed the same unnatural stillness. Men and women of various ages, all connected to the same type of monitoring equipment, all breathing with that same mechanical precision. A door at the far end of the room opened, and a figure in scrubs entered. From where I stood, I couldn't make out details, but they moved with the same eerie coordination I'd observed in David Chen. They checked each patient systematically, adjusting equipment, reading monitors, making notes on a clipboard. I needed to get into that room. I backtracked through the corridor, looking for another way in. Near the main entrance, I found a stairway leading to the second floor. The stairs were metal and old, creaking with each step despite my attempts at stealth. The second floor was different from the first. Instead of patient rooms, it housed what looked like a control center. Banks of monitors lined the walls, each displaying different feeds. Some showed the rooms downstairs, others displayed what looked like surveillance footage from around town. I recognized several locations: the house on Maple Street, Linda's neighborhood, the school where I taught, even the motel where I'd been staying. They'd been watching everything. But it was the central monitor that made me stop breathing. It showed a map of the town with dozens of red dots scattered across it. Each dot pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. As I watched, new dots appeared while others faded away. A legend in the corner identified them as active interventions. The memory keepers weren't just editing individual memories, they were managing the entire town. How many other marriages had they dissolved? How many other lives had they rewritten? How many people were lying downstairs, having their realities reconstructed while the world above forgot they'd ever existed? Impressive, isn't it? I spun around. A woman in a lab coat stood in the doorway, watching me with the same empty expression I'd seen on David Chen and Robert Kellner. She was middle-aged, with graying hair, and the kind of face that should have been kind, but instead looked carved from stone. "Dr. Sarah Martinez," she said, extending a hand I didn't take. "I'm the director of this facility. I've been expecting you." "Where's my wife?" "She's downstairs, undergoing the final stages of narrative integration. The process will be complete within the hour." "What process? What are you doing to her?" Dr. Martinez gestured to the monitors around us. "We're giving her the life she always wanted, free from the compromises and disappointments that defined her marriage to you. Free to love someone who makes her truly happy." By brainwashing her? By editing out the sources of her pain. Sarah came to us voluntarily, Mr. Hartley. She was drowning in a relationship that no longer served her, but she couldn't bring herself to hurt you by leaving. So we offered her an alternative. "You're stealing her memories. We're curating them, removing the painful ones, enhancing the positive ones, creating space for new experiences unburdened by past trauma." Dr. Martinez moved to one of the monitors and pulled up what looked like a brain scan. "This is Sarah's mind, mapped in real time. The red areas indicate memories that cause stress or unhappiness. We simply edit those out." I stared at the pulsing image on the screen. Parts of Sarah's brain were highlighted in red: memories of our arguments, our struggles, the slow erosion of romantic love into comfortable companionship. But other areas were red too. Our first kiss, our wedding day, quiet Sunday mornings in bed. "You're not just removing the bad memories," I realized. "You're taking everything, our entire relationship." Precisely. A clean slate allows for optimal narrative reconstruction. And David Chen is a composite. We've taken the best qualities of every partner Sarah ever imagined herself with and combined them into a single personality. He's everything you were, but better. More attentive, more romantic, more compatible with her emotional needs. The casual way she described it made me sick. They were treating human consciousness like a video game, editing and optimizing until they achieved their desired outcome. What about the people you're displacing? What happened to the real David Chen? There was no real David Chen. He's a construct, created specifically for Sarah's new narrative, though I suppose you could say he's become real through the process of living. And me? What happens to me in Sarah's new reality? You don't exist. You never met, never dated, never married. From her perspective, you're just a stranger who's been stalking her and claiming to be her husband. The monitors around us continued their steady display of surveillance feeds and brain activity patterns. I counted at least 30 people being processed simultaneously, their memories stripped away and rebuilt according to someone else's specifications. How long has this been going on? The Memory Keeper project has been operational for 12 years. We've helped over 2,000 individuals transition to more fulfilling lives by erasing everyone who inconvenienced them, by editing out the sources of psychological distress that prevent people from achieving happiness. Depression, anxiety, PTSD, relationship trauma can be addressed through careful memory curation. And the people who get erased in the process, do they matter at all? Dr. Martinez tilted her head, as if the question confused her. Every edit has consequences, but the greater good requires difficult choices. I looked back at the monitor showing Sarah's brain activity. The red areas were shrinking as I watched, memories being deleted in real time. Soon, there would be nothing left of us. "I want to see her." "That wouldn't be advisable. The integration process is delicate. Any disruption could cause psychological damage." "I don't care." "But we do. Sarah's well-being is our primary concern." I started moving toward the stairs, but Dr. Martinez stepped into my path. "I can't allow that, Mr. Hartley. Try to stop me." She reached into her lab coat and pulled out a device that looked like a modified tablet. With a few quick touches, the screens around us changed to show different camera angles of the facility. Security personnel were already moving through the building, converging on the stairway. "You have two choices," Dr. Martinez said calmly. "You can submit to memory editing yourself. We'll remove your recollections of Sarah and integrate you into a new narrative where you're happy and fulfilled. Or you can resist and spend the rest of your life in one of our long-term care units while we continue to edit your memories until you achieve a stable psychological state. There's a third choice, which is..." I grabbed the tablet from her hands and smashed it against the wall. Sparks flew from the broken screen, and several of the monitors went dark. Alarms began sounding throughout the facility. I bring this whole place down. Dr. Martinez's composed expression cracked for the first time. You don't understand what you're doing. There are 30 patients undergoing active treatment. If you disrupt the process, they get their real memories back. They suffer permanent psychological damage. Memory editing isn't reversible, Mr. Hartley. Once the process is interrupted, the subjects are left with fragments of multiple realities. They go insane. I hesitated. The monitors were flickering now, some showing static, others displaying error messages. I could hear footsteps on the stairs, security getting closer. That's not my problem, I said finally. You should have thought about that before you started playing with people's minds. I grabbed a chair and hurled it at the largest monitor. The screen exploded in a shower of sparks and broken glass. Dr. Martinez lunged for a wall-mounted alarm, but I tackled her before she could reach it. We struggled briefly before the security team burst through the door. 3 figures in black uniforms moved with the same mechanical precision I'd seen in all the Memory Keeper's constructs. They weren't humaner. If they had been once, there wasn't much humanity left. I broke free from Dr. Martinez and ran for the window. It was a 20-foot drop to the parking lot below, but the alternative was spending the rest of my life as a drooling vegetable in one of their treatment rooms. The glass shattered as I went through it. I hit the asphalt hard, rolling to absorb the impact. Pain shot through my left shoulder, but I could still move. Behind me, alarms continued to wail as emergency lighting bathed the facility in red. I ran for my car, expecting to hear pursuit, but the facility had gone quiet. Too quiet. As I reached the tree line, I looked back and saw that all the windows were dark. The Memory Keepers had shut down operations. I drove straight to Linda's house, my shoulder throbbing with each turn of the wheel. She took one look at my battered appearance and pulled me inside. What happened? You look like you've been in a car accident. I told her everything: the facility, the patients, Sarah hooked up to machines while they rewrote her memories. Linda listened in growing horror, occasionally asking questions, but mostly just staring at me with the expression of someone watching their world collapse. So what happens now? She asked when I finished. If you disrupted their process, what happens to Sarah? I don't know. Dr. Martinez said the editing wasn't reversible, that interrupting it would cause psychological damage. But maybe that's better than letting them finish. Maybe she'll remember. Maybe the real Sarah will come back. I wanted to believe that, but I'd seen the brain scans. They'd already deleted so much. Even if the process was interrupted, how much of Sarah would be left? We tried calling the police, but when the officers arrived to investigate the abandoned mental health facility, they found nothing. The building was empty, the equipment gone, no sign that anyone had been there in years. My broken window had been repaired, my footprints erased from the dust. The Memory Keepers had cleaned house and disappeared. Over the next few days, I waited for something to happen. For Sarah to call, confused and disoriented. For David Chen to vanish from our house. For some sign that disrupting the facility had made a difference. Nothing changed. David continued his routine work, grocery shopping, tending the garden. The thing that looked like Sarah still moved through the house with mechanical precision. According to all official records, they'd been living there for 3 years and were perfectly normal. But on the 4th day, Linda called with news. She's here, Linda said, her voice shaking. Sarah's here. I drove to Linda's house faster than I'd ever driven before. Sarah's car was in the driveway. Not the car David's version drove, but her actual car with the dent in the rear bumper from when she'd backed into our mailbox. Sarah was sitting in Linda's kitchen, looking exactly as I remembered her. Same clothes she'd worn the morning she disappeared, same messy bun, same running shoes. But her eyes were different. Confused, lost. "Thomas," she said when I walked in. "What are you doing here? Where am I?" I sat down across from her, hardly daring to breathe. "You're at your mother's house. You've been missing for 3 months." "Missing? That's impossible. I was going for a run, and then..." She pressed her hands to her temples. "My head hurts. Everything feels wrong." "What do you remember?" "I remember leaving for my jog. You were grading papers in the kitchen. I kissed you goodbye and said I'd pick up groceries on the way home. But then, nothing. It's like I blinked and suddenly I'm here." Linda reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. Honey, what's the last thing you remember clearly? Sarah's face scrunched with concentration. Painting the bedroom. We were arguing about the color. You wanted blue, but I thought yellow would be brighter. She looked at me with growing confusion. But that was years ago. Why is that the clearest memory I have? Because they tried to erase everything else, I said gently. Someone kidnapped you, Sarah. They were trying to make you forget our life together. That's insane. Who would do something like that? I told her about the memory keepers, about David Chen, about the facility where I'd found her. As I spoke, Sarah's expression shifted from confusion to horror to something approaching understanding. The dreams, she said suddenly. I've been having these dreams about a different life, a house that looks like ours but isn't ours, a man who looks like you but isn't you. Everything was perfect in the dreams but also wrong somehow. That wasn't a dream, that was them trying to give you a new life. Sarah stood up abruptly and walked to the window. I need to see the house, our house. Sarah, there's someone else living there now, someone who looks like us but isn't us. I don't care, I need to see it. We drove to Maple Street in my car, Sarah silent and tense beside me. As we turned the corner onto our street, she gasped. The garden's different. The roses are in the wrong place. She was right. The rose bushes Sarah had planted were gone, replaced by more conventional landscaping. Our house looked like a catalog photo perfect but sterile. Should we knock? Linda asked from the back seat. No, Sarah said firmly. I want to watch first. I want to see these things that are pretending to be us. We parked across the street and waited. At 5:30, David Chen's car pulled into the driveway. He got out and walked to the front door with that same mechanical precision I'd observed before. A minute later, the Sarah thing appeared in the window, waving as if she'd been watching for him. Jesus Christ, Sarah whispered. That looks exactly like me. We watched them move around the house, visible through the windows. They prepared dinner together, ate in perfect synchronization, cleaned up with choreographed efficiency. It was like watching a performance of domestic happiness. They're not real, Sarah said. They look like us, but they're not real. The question is, what do we do about it? Sarah was quiet for a long time, watching her doppelganger wash dishes in what used to be our kitchen. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and determined. We get our life back. The plan was simple, if not exactly legal. We waited until the next morning, when David left for work. Then Sarah walked up to the front door and knocked. The Sarah thing answered with a pleasant smile that faltered when she saw the real Sarah standing on the porch. Can I help you? The doppelganger asked, but her voice lacked its usual smoothness. Seeing the real Sarah seemed to cause some kind of conflict in her programming. I'm Sarah Hartley, Sarah said calmly. This is my house. The doppelganger's expression flickered between confusion and alarm. I think there's been some mistake. I'm Sarah Chen. This is my house. No, you're not. You're something pretending to be me, and I want you to leave. I watched from the car as the two Sarahs faced each other. The doppelganger was clearly malfunctioning, her movements becoming jerky and unnatural. When she spoke again, her voice had a strange electronic quality. Error. Narrative conflict detected. Initializing defensiva protocols. The thing that looked like my wife pulled out a cell phone and made a call. I couldn't hear what she said, but I could guess. She was calling for backup. Sarah came running back to the car. We need to leave. Now. As we drove away, I saw black SUVs converging on Maple Street from multiple directions. The memory keepers were mobilizing to contain the situation. But it was too late. The damage was done. Sarah's return had created a paradox in their carefully constructed narrative. Two versions of the same person couldn't exist in the same reality. One of them had to be fake. And now, everyone could see which one was real. Over the next few weeks, the memory keeper's control over the town began to break down. People started remembering things that didn't match the official narrative. Linda's photo album began filling itself back in as her memories returned. Neighbors recalled seeing Sarah and me at the house on Maple Street. Even Mrs. Henderson admitted she might have been a bit confused about who lived next door. The doppelgangers fought back, of course. David Chen filed a restraining order against us. claiming Sarah was a delusional stalker. The fake Sarah appeared on local news, tearfully describing how her mentally ill impersonator was trying to steal her identity. But their performances were becoming increasingly unconvincing. Without the memory keeper's active intervention, the artificial personalities couldn't maintain their human facades. David's movements grew more robotic. The fake Sarah's expressions became a series of practiced poses rather than genuine emotions. Eventually, they simply stopped. I drove by the house one morning to find both cars gone, the windows dark, a "for sale" sign on the lawn. David Chen and his version of Sarah had vanished as completely as they'd appeared. The memory keepers tried one last gambit. Dr. Martinez called me personally, offering to restore the optimal timeline, where Sarah was happy with David and I was free to find someone better suited to my needs. Everyone could be happy, she insisted. Sarah, you, David, all living the lives you deserve rather than the lives you settled for. We didn't settle, I told her. We chose each other. Every day we chose each other. That's what marriage is. Even when that choice caused suffering? Especially then. There was a long pause. You're making a mistake, Mr. Hartley. Memory is unreliable. Love is chemical. Happiness is achievable through proper narrative management. We're offering you perfection. I don't want perfection. I want my wife. The line went dead. The memory keepers never contacted us again. Sarah and I are back in our house now. It feels different, smaller somehow, as if experiencing the perfect version has made the real version seem inadequate by comparison. The garden needs replanting, the bathroom door still sticks when it rains, and the third stair still creaks. Sometimes I catch Sarah staring at nothing, a confused expression on her face. The memory keeper's editing left gaps in her recollection, months or years that exist only as vague impressions. She remembers loving me, but not always why. She remembers our wedding, but not our honeymoon. She remembers moving into the house, but not painting the bedroom. Do you regret it? I asked her one night, as we lay in bed. Coming back to this, instead of staying in the perfect life they made for you? She was quiet for so long I thought she'd fallen asleep. When she finally answered, her voice was barely a whisper. I dream about him sometimes, David. In the dreams, everything is easy. We never fight, never disappoint each other, never have to work at being happy. It's seductive. She turned to face me in the darkness, but it's not real. The problems we have, the things we have to work through, that's what makes us, us. Take that away, and we're just stories someone else is telling. Even when the story is better, especially then. We're seeing a counselor now, Dr. Rebecca Torres, who has a long history of treating patients with memory disorders. She's helping Sarah recover what she can and cope with what's been permanently lost. She's also helping me deal with the guilt of knowing that somewhere out there, other families are being torn apart by the memory keepers. Because they're still operating, the facility may be gone, but the project continues. Every few months, I hear about someone else whose spouse has mysteriously disappeared, whose friends suddenly don't remember them, whose entire life has been quietly erased and rewritten. I've tried to warn people, but who would believe such a story? The memory keepers are careful now, more subtle in their interventions. They've learned from their mistakes with us. But they made one mistake they can't correct. They let me remember. And as long as I remember, as long as I can tell this story, their work isn't complete. Sarah is getting stronger every day. Her memories are still fragmented, but she's building new ones to fill the gaps. We're learning to love each other again, not because some external force has edited out our incompatibilities, but because we're choosing to do the work. It's messier than the perfect life they offered us. It's harder, but it's real. And real, I've learned, is worth fighting for. Last week, Linda called to tell me she'd found another box of photos in her attic, pictures of Sarah and me that had somehow survived the memory keeper's purge. In one of them, we're painting the bedroom, Sarah with yellow paint in her hair, me covered in blue streaks, both of us laughing at the disaster we'd made. I don't remember that day clearly. The memory keepers took that from me too. But looking at the photo, I can see the truth they tried so hard to erase. We were happy. Not perfectly, not easily, but genuinely. And that was enough. It's still enough. The memory keepers can edit our past, but they can't rewrite our future. That's ours to create, one imperfect, beautiful, real day at a time. And every morning when Sarah kisses me goodbye before her jog, I remember that sometimes the most profound act of rebellion is simply refusing to forget.